So I work with Amazon. I work with their Prime Video team. And I work in a specific area of Prime Video, and I take care of that area worldwide. And the topic of discussion today is building global products. So how do you build global products? And if you are a PM in that domain where you're working on a product which is global in scale, which is present in many countries, what sort of skill set you need, what sort of challenges you face, and how to tackle those. And what essentially it means is basically scaling your product globally, because whenever any business or any product starts, the CEO of that company or the founder will always have in their mind that, yes, they're solving a global problem, and in future they want to extend that product globally, but you don't design your product globally from the day one. You have that in the back of your mind, but in your journey over a period of time, you realize, yes, this is a product which has a market fit, which solves a global problem, and this is the stage when we need to start thinking about international expansion, how to build a global product. So it's more like, you scale the product globally rather than build a product globally. And as all of you know, these are some of the products which you can classify into global products. I'll be taking examples from some of these products in my presentation. I'll try to avoid Amazon examples intentionally. Okay. Before we dive into that, let's assume some things, right? So that all of these things are already established, and on the basis of that platform, we sort of move on the basis of those assumptions. We move ahead and say what we need to do next, right? So let's say you have already a product which has already achieved the product market fit in one or few countries. You know that this product solves a global problem, and other parts are you have figured out your international expansion strategy, right? You have figured out what are the markets you want to expand, what are the top markets out of that, what is the time frame you want to expand, et cetera, based on ROI, based on regulations, based on legal, and all those factors. And you have a team structure in place for global success. So we'll not talk about these things. We are making these assumptions, assuming that all of these are present. What would be our next step? And you would have heard of this concept called localization, right? With any global product. And this is a very old concept, which means local language, local currency, pricing, payments, content, distribution. Most of us already are aware of these concepts because they have been there in place for last decade or so, since the company started becoming more global. So I'll try to focus less on this, but more on a different concept, which is called internationalization. And what that means is, and there's a very, very thin line between these two concepts. What that means is changing your core product in a way that it becomes more flexible to adapt to your growing international needs. And the reason why I say there's a thin line between these two concepts is, if you go 10 years back or 15 years back, if you take the example of any of these, let's say payments, 15 years back, even payments would have fallen in that domain because the product was not built in such a way that payments was already a plug-and-play model, right? So over the last decade or over the last 15 years, most of the companies who are global in nature have made their payment mechanisms so much flexible that if you have to launch in a new country tomorrow, you can easily adapt to the payment standards in those countries, right? So over a period of time, these concepts have become more in localization domain, and there are other concepts which I'll talk and focus more about in the internationalization domain. Okay, now coming to building global products, I've categorized it into 3 core skills which you need as a PM when you're looking at your product from a global standpoint, from the perspective of, if you look at the next 3 years, these are the markets you want to expand to, what are the top challenges and what are the skills you need to sort of tackle those challenges. And the first of that is you need a mindset where you need to understand that although you might have a product in one of the countries, let's say you launch with a product in US, but if you are expanding to Europe, UK, Germany, or if you are expanding to Asia, as a PM, it's very important that you understand that your product needs to fit the local market. And what I mean by that would be clear in the example I take next. But this is the most important skill set, to realize that global expansion is not a copy-paste model. You need to go beyond that. And let's take a couple of examples. So this is the screen, or this is the snapshot of Spotify when they launched in Japan in 2016. And Spotify has been there for like 10 years or so. Before that, they never had lyrics because whatever markets they were present in, let's say US and Europe predominantly, they did not consider that lyrics is an important feature to have in a product, right? But when they looked at Japan as a market, that market is a very lyrics-focused market in the sense that karaoke is very famous in Japan. There are clubs, there are bars on every corner which cater to those sort of audience. And when they realized that, they figured out that, okay, we have lyrics as a feature in somewhere in our backlog, and we need that to be out in the market, but we are launching Japan, and we need that feature for that market. And that's how that feature came into existence in Spotify in 2016. I guess even till today, it's not launched in any of their other markets in US or Europe. So this is one of the examples where as a PM, you realize what is important in that market for the success of your product, and you build that. Now, I don't have the metrics or the data to sort of say whether it was helpful, whether this feature was helpful in their success in Japan or not, but this is one of the examples. Can anyone tell me which app this is? Any ideas, any guesses? Sorry? Is it Uber? Yeah. So that's the Uber app in India, which they launched in 2018. They launched a new version of Uber app, a different version of Uber app, which is quite different from what you see in EU or US or whatever their standard app is. And the reason is that in India, as a geography, you have a lot of population who is on feature phones, which are somewhere between, old dated phones and smartphones, but not as smart as smartphones. You have customers who don't have a very regular internet connection. It's a patchy internet connection. You have customers who have very less space on their mobile, so you want to reduce the size of your app. And all those factors drove Uber to build a light app, which takes 5 MB space on your mobile, which consumes very less internet, and which even works if you have a patchy internet connection. And this approach has been taken by even other companies. Facebook was the one to take that approach, followed by LinkedIn, and followed by Uber. So that's another example of local product market fit, where as a PM, you have to understand what are the conditions in that market, what are the customer behaviors in that market. Do you need to modify your product to sort of grow in that market? The third example is of Netflix. So Netflix, again, it's an example of India, a feature they launched in India this year called Smart Downloads. So Netflix launched internationally, I think, in 150 plus countries in 2016. That was their international expansion. And they launched a feature called downloads in 2016, wherein you as a customer can just go on your mobile app and download whatever content you want to watch. And the reason for that was in a lot of international markets, in a lot of emerging countries where Netflix launched at that time, internet prices were high, internet was patchy, and a lot of customers were mobile-first customers. So you can launch a feature for downloads where a customer can download on Wi-Fi network and then watch on the go. So this feature was there in 2016, but what they realized in 2018 is in India, the peak streaming for Netflix happens at 9 a.m. in the morning, which is a very, very different data point if you consider any other market. And what they realized from that data insights and from looking at the data of the customer behavior in that market is a lot of people are watching Netflix on the go. And what they did, and that was the country which was using the download feature the most. So what they did was they introduced something called smart downloads on top of the downloads. And what that feature does is, as soon as you finish your, let's say, episode 1, it will automatically download the next episode as long as you are on a Wi-Fi network. So let's say if you have downloaded 4 episodes, you're watching on your commute to office or wherever, in the night you come back home, you have watched 2 episodes, Netflix will download the episode number 5 and 6 automatically. Obviously there's setting to control that if you want to control your internet usage, but that's a very smart feature in that market which encourages the habit of watching Netflix every day. You sort of go in a mode of binge watching if the content is already there on your mobile, right? So that is another example of adapting to the local market needs, local customer behavior. And all of this, I don't know, I don't work in any of these companies, so I don't know how much impact it had on their uptake or how much positively or negatively all of these features impacted. But that's how, as a PM, you need to think whenever you're thinking about global expansion. So that was the first point. The second point is you need to design for global, although you might prioritize for local. And what that means is, as a PM for a product which is global in nature, you always need to develop a forward-looking global view for your product area. Now that is true even for PMs who are not in a global role, right? But if you are in a global role, you need to think probably 3 years ahead of the countries you might expand in next 3 years, what competitors are doing in those countries, what sort of product do you need in those countries. And the reason for that is you want to develop your product in a way which goes back to the first principle where while thinking and while designing your product and while talking to your engineers, you can sort of give them visibility that, okay, next year we are going to expand in this country and these are the possible feature sets which can come in that country, so that the engineering team designs in a way so that it costs very incremental effort to sort of customize your product to that country or to build those features. And let's take an example of that. If you look at this particular product of Uber, which is a very basic thing which probably they launched with in 2010-11. And if you look at Uber as a whole, the most customization or the most flexibility which they have done over the years is in this area, right? The PM, whoever would be the PM for this area, would have understood at some point during the Uber's journey, I don't know, like 2012, 2013, that you are going to expand into many countries, many cities in the world. And all of those cities are going to have their different behaviors, their different modes of transport, different things. And this part of Uber needs to be very flexible because that's the first touch point for customer. And if you look at the innovations which have happened in that area and have happened at a very fast pace, you look at this, they launched Chopper in some of the countries sometime down the line. They launched an ice cream pickup. They launched Uber boats, and that's a screenshot, I think, from Croatia. And they even launched a phone delivery in India. Now, all of these are very different use cases. They have very different flows, and even when you click on these options, the flow which follows are very different. But as a PM, let's say if you are a PM for this specific product area, you need to understand that this is an area which needs most flexibility. This is an area which will have different needs for different markets, and you need to design in a way that even if, let's say, Uber is not launched in country X yet, and if they're planning to launch next year, what are the needs of that country, and what I need to do today in whatever work my team is doing to make sure team has the visibility that that is coming. So when Uber would have launched Chopper, let's say, they might not have designed for mobile delivery, but that PM would have thought that that is a use case which possibly can come. Not mobile delivery, but any sort of delivery, right? And a lot of those things would not be very accurate, right? When you are taking a 3-year view, you most of the times will have guesses that this is something which might happen based on the scenario or needs in that country, but it's not 100% accurate that it will happen. So you need to take that view and feed that view back to your development teams to say that whatever you are doing today, you don't need to build for the next use case for that country, but you need to design in a way that whenever we need to build 2 years down the line, it should be minimum cost. It will still take cost, but you need to reduce that cost. Same way, if I go back to this example, right? So this is something which has been done for a specific market in India. But let's strip this out, and let's say this feature of hiding the map or taking the map in the background so that less data and less bandwidth is consumed by Uber app can even be used in US or EU. Let's say I'm a roaming international customer. I want to control my internet usage. I can toggle and switch to that mode, right? So you don't need a full app, but if you are making a change in your core product, you need to think from an angle where each of these different components, either as a whole or individually, might be relevant for other geographies, right? Okay, and the last point, which is again a very critical skill set and a very big challenge for anyone in the global product management role, is how do you balance the trade-offs in a global context? So let's take an example. Let's say Uber launched in US, or any product launched in US that has been there for a couple of years, and you want to launch in a new country. The biggest challenge as a PM you are going to have is most of the times you tend to prioritize features based on their ROI, right? And when you're launching in a new country, let's say you launched in a country 5 months back and you have a very small base compared to US or Europe, which has a decent base because you have been in that country for a couple of years. How do you manage that trade-off? Let's say you have 2 dev resources and they can deliver only one feature, and that can be either a US feature or that can be a feature in your new market. How do you balance that trade-off? And unfortunately, there's any structured answer to that, and there's no structured rule to that. But one thing which you as a PM needs to realize is that if you are talking about an established market, there will always be a higher impact in terms of numbers, right? Because anything you add to your product, if you want to increase the usage, you will be talking in terms of percentage. And just because the base in the established market is high, the impact of that feature is going to be high. So you always need to go beyond ROI and see, even if it is a low impact, if that is something which is critical for success in that geography, in that market, then you need to take that call. Second is, again, all of those go back to the same point where, doing a feature in US might give you a higher impact in the short term, but if you take a 5-year view or a 10-year view and you want to be successful in a global context, you need to take a long-term view and say that, okay, even if I'm getting a lower ROI, this is something which is critical, and unless we keep delivering for our new markets, we'll not be able to reach that threshold where the product grows. And it's basically the same thing, local success versus global success. So that as a PM, you need to understand that, and as a PM, you need to sort of build a case around that to take your leadership into that thought process. Most of the leadership will always have that thought process, but there would be times where you need to convince the leadership that even if it is low ROI thing, we need to invest into that because it's critical from customers' point of view and for the success of that market. All right, so that's pretty much the presentation. We'll open it up for Q&As. Yeah.
How do you structure your teams to deal with global/local specific demand or backlog items?
Right. So different companies follow different structures. It depends on whatever company you are in and what is the most suitable structure for that. But I think there are a couple of base points which need to be made sure they are there for a global success. And one of that is, as a company or as an organization in which you work, you need to have people who are aware of the needs of those markets. Now, some companies do it in a way that they establish, marketing and business teams in those local markets, and those teams feed, local customer behavior, local needs to the global PMs. Some companies do it in a way that they have country-specific product managers. So there's a product manager who might be sitting, in US, but who is looking specifically into the needs of India or Japan or some other country. So he has a very narrow focus around going deep in that country, understanding the needs, and then feeding that back to a global PM or a platform PM or someone who's working on the core product. So different companies follow different structures, but I guess the key point is that you need a team or a group of individuals who are focused on understanding the needs of that specific country or that specific region. Yeah.
I just have a question. So how do you identify a feature that is critical but low ROI? Can you give an example? And how do you sell that to the business in this example?
So I think it goes back to the point where, there are two parts of that, right? How do you identify a feature which is critical? And second thing is, once you have identified the feature, and let's assume it's a low ROI, how do you make the business case and sell it? So for identifying the feature, there are a couple of things, right? One is there are different sources of data. There are different sources of customer behavior understanding, both qualitative and quantitative. And if you see a lot of these things, for example, if you take the Netflix example or if you take the Uber example, most of their modifications around their product in local areas have come after they have launched in that country, right? So they launch in a country with a basic product with basic things around localization, which is payment, support, content, distribution, etc. They operate in that country for, let's say, a year or so. They gather a lot of data from their product, how people are using it, how customers are using it, what are different behaviors. And based on that data, they sort of frame a view that this is the problem which you need to solve, and this is the feature to solve that problem, right? So in many cases, you will see that data-driven approach. But if you take the Spotify example, where they launched a specific country with that feature itself, that's more driven through the cultural differences of that country, right? Because people want lyrics in that country, and there's very little way to sort of quantify that, because as a company, all you will have is a competitor data or research data. You will not have actual data from your product. So sometimes you need to take those gut calls and say that this is something which is minimal to launch in this country. So that is the process of how do you identify how to solve a local need and what's the solution for that. Now the second point to your question is, how do you sell that to your leadership, to your business, that you need this investment? And that goes back to the point that you design for global. Although you are prioritizing for that specific country, but you design for global, and you say that in 2 years' time, if you build this feature, it's going to be used in X number of markets, and that has the potential. So you take a long-term view, and you say that, okay, this is the overall business case which justifies that investment. So if I take the Spotify example, they launched song lyrics, let's say in Japan, and let's say none other country requires lyrics with the songs. But there might be countries which require song search based on lyrics. There are a lot of countries in the world where the customer behavior is like, you enter the lyrics, you don't know the song name, you don't remember the song name, you enter the lyrics for search. So you also can figure out adjacent use cases for which this is a base functionality. So lyrics needs to be there, only then the search on lyrics can happen. Okay, any other questions? Yeah.
Traditionally, you see like PMs in tech companies coming from like software engineer backgrounds.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that's like the best path? Like, do you to go into software engineering and then, get years down the line?
I don't think that's the best path. Again, in many of the companies, especially in big companies, if you talk about Google, Amazon, Facebook, probably Uber, and many other companies, there are different product areas which are more tech heavy, and then there are some areas which are more marketing heavy, some areas which are more design heavy. And each of these areas generally have PMs to figure out, what we should do in that area, how shall we prioritize, what are more important for customer, etc. So, for example, if I talk about Amazon, AWS, if you consider AWS or Prime Video or Alexa, they are very tech heavy products. Whereas if you consider Amazon Retail, it's not that tech heavy. It's still technology, but it's not tech heavy compared to other businesses. So you always have these product areas and these businesses where a specific skill set is more suited. So in tech heavy sort of product area, it's helpful for PMs to have tech background. Whereas there are always areas where even if you don't have tech background, companies are more than happy to hire. Yeah.
Sorry, one more question. How do you manage local fixed legal requirements from a prioritization point of view?
Right. So there are, again, different companies follow different approach, but I think from a legal standpoint of view, there are some things which are absolute deal breakers, right? For example, let's say if I talk an example of, let's say, country X, where if you are in a business of content, let's say Netflix or probably Prime Video as well. If you are in business of content, you need to rate your content just from the perspective that the audience know it's for 10 years old, it's for 15 years old, it's not good for consumption of kids, etc. There are some countries which don't require that. So from a legal standpoint, anything which is a deal breaker, which can sort of block the launch of your product, needs to be absolute critical requirement, needs to be solved at a priority basis. because that might stop the release of your product, or that might even if it is released, some regulator takes some action someday and you might be on the wrong side of the fence.
What do you do when it comes to solutionizing these functionalities, these features? Do you try to make them something that's scalable, or do you just focus on that market? Let's just get this legal requirement sorted for that market and focus on a market by market basis.
So it's there's no definite answer to that, but to whatever extent possible, you should try as a PM to build scalable solutions. And the part of that goes back to the same point, right? To this point where, let's say if I have a legal requirement in Germany, and let's say if I might have a different legal requirement in UK, but UK is not a critical requirement at this point. It's not an immediate requirement. You will build for Germany, but you will build in a way that it can scale to UK with minimal investment in future. So you might not build for UK at that point of time, but you need to give that view to your dev team so that they design the things in a way, to whatever extent possible, that if it took you, let's say, 1 month to build for Germany, it should probably take another 1 week to build for UK, or another 2 weeks. So it should not be like you took 4 weeks for Germany and again you took 4 weeks for UK. And that's the whole concept of designing for global. It's not that whatever you build for one country, you can just copy paste in another country, because requirements will be slightly different, needs will be slightly different. But you need to have that view to design and build in a way that you reduce the incremental effort later. Yeah.
So you mentioned earlier that to design your product, you need to have a 3-year vision.
Mm-hmm.
Can you elaborate a bit more on the information that you use to actually define this 3-year vision, and also the process to define this 3-year vision?
Right. So the first thing is that in a lot of cases, you will not have a very defined 3-year vision. For example, let's take an example. Let's take Spotify, right? Now, Spotify as a company will have an understanding that in the next 3 years, we are going to expand to Asia, these countries, let's say these 10 countries, and in Australia and New Zealand. Now you will go, and first thing is, as a PM, you will go and speak to your counterparts in international expansion or marketing, etc., to get a view on where these expansions are. Because for those expansions to happen, a lot of things need to fall in place. You need to get the content rights in those geographies. You need to do tie-ups with labels. You need to, there might be some legal constraints which you can't meet in next year, etc. So first thing you need to do is to speak to those teams in your company to get a view of where do we stand with respect to those expansions from the point of view of other areas. And that gives you a rough estimate of, okay, next year these are the probable countries where you might be expected to launch, and year 2 these are the probable countries, year 3 these are the probable countries, and you sort of work backwards from there to see if there might be folks, marketing folks or other people in your country who come from those countries, in your company who come from those countries, or there are teams who are local in those countries. You sort of try to gather information. Is there any differences? Is there a different way in which customers consume music in those countries? Will streaming work in those countries, or do you need something else? Will a single plan which Spotify sells as of today, let's say £10 a month, will that work, or do customers have different needs? Do they need downloads more? Do they need something else more? So you work backward from that plan to sort of figure out these are the probable areas which will need investment from a product perspective, and that's how you prioritize that. Again, it's not a very definite, written in stone thing. You have to work on that and see what is the probability of all of these things falling in place, and what is the probability that this feature would be required. Yeah.
So I think in your case, like Amazon Video, how much of your prioritization is driven by what your competitor is doing? For example, Netflix versus what Amazon is deciding, okay, this has a business case. Because it's more or less same product, Netflix and Amazon Video.
So yeah, in general, in Amazon, not just in Prime Video, Amazon focuses a lot on customers, what customer wants, rather than focusing on competitors. So most of the product features, most of the product requirement, product vision, strategy is more driven from what customers in that country are doing or are expecting from Amazon, rather than what competitors are doing. So you don't need to copy competitor strategy, but you need to frame your own strategy. Now that's the case with Amazon in the way Amazon operates. Different companies follow different strategies. Some copy competitors, some don't copy competitors. And that is in general at a strategy level. But again, from a product perspective, you need to figure out what are the minimum basics where you need to match your competitors or exceed your competitors. So, we don't need to copy Netflix as it is, but we need to understand what are the minimum basic product functionality which is expected by customers and we must have. And if some competitor has and we don't have, we should build that. Right? For example, if I take a case of pricing, pricing is something which impacts customers a lot. And if some other competitor has a feature which sort of reduces their pricing, let's say by a tie-up with some telecom operator or a tie-up with someone else, then we should figure out what is our strategy to counter that. It might not be exact same thing, it might be something different, but you need to work backward from customer perspective that I need to provide same or better pricing. How do I do that? Yeah.
When you're coming up with new features for the global market or even for a local market, how much of your research is based on data versus actually going and meeting your customers in person? And what's the extra value that you find that going to meet your customers gives you?
Right. Again, that varies from company to company, from product to product. For example, if there's a product which is already exists in that country and you have access to that data, as in case of Netflix and Uber, most of the decision should be based on the quantitative data. You still collect qualitative data in terms of user studies, reviews which are coming on your app or on your customer service calls. But if you are present in a country, you have a lot of quantitative data of what customers are doing on your product. And the other reason is that and the other reason why quantitative data is more accurate is that if you are a company that is operating in scale in a country, you might have quantitative data from 1 million customers or let's say 10 million customers. And if a lot of customers are indicating you towards one particular direction, there is high probability and high chances that that direction will be correct. Whereas in case of qualitative data, there's an issue with the scale. You can collect data from, let's say, 100 customers, 1,000 customers, 10,000, but you will never reach the scale of millions, right? And as your sample set is low, the probability of that being not the correct feedback is high.
So I'm just thinking back to the Spotify example, because that feature didn't even exist in the product.
Right.
They probably had to get that from some sort of local context. I mean, everyone knows Japan loves karaoke, but
right.
A similar product where the feature doesn't exist, so how do you go about finding that?
So yeah, so for that, where your product doesn't exist in the country itself, there are 2-3 ways. Again, most of them are going to be qualitative. You do some user research studies with a selected group of users. There are agencies or companies who can help you that in that market. You do studies based on competitor, what the competitor, if there's a competitor product, what they are doing, etc. You take inputs from any research studies which have happened in that market in the past few years. But again, as I said, it might not be as accurate as a qualitative data, and sometimes you have to take that gut feel and say that this is the customer behavior in this market. Let's figure out what is the investment. Then you take a different approach. Then you go back and say, if we have to launch this feature, what is the investment? And can we do it, let's say if I have to do a lyrics feature, can I do it for only top 100 songs? Let's do it for top 100 songs and see if it is getting used, if people are even clicking on lyrics or viewing the lyrics. And if they are, then I'll scale that feature, right? So then you take the view of how do you reduce your investment till you have a concrete data point that you need to go full-fledged. Yeah.
So pretty much the companies you've mentioned, they have like a monopoly in that markets they operate.
Mm-hmm.
And, however, in other markets like airlines or newspapers,
mm-hmm.
there's a lot of competition.
Right.
So what is the advantage whatsoever in being a PM in one of these companies where there's a lot of competition, because then it's quite difficult to have like long-term goals?
Sorry, I didn't get it clearly.
So because you are in quite a competitive market,
mm-hmm.
you just have to kind of struggle or meet your targets for the next quarters and so on.
Right.
It's quite difficult to have like a 3 years
mm-hmm.
strategy.
Right.
So what will be like the advantage being a PM in that one of that markets if you don't have all that flexibility that you can have in a monopoly?
So if you look at a lot of these companies, whether Amazon or Uber, you might consider them as monopolies because of their global scale. But even if you look from a local market standpoint, because there are many cities where Uber operates, or many countries where Amazon operates, where they are not number one, right? So I don't agree to the point that you are monopoly as a whole. You need to consider a market or country specific. How do they stand in that country, and whether they are a monopoly there or not. And irrespective of that, whether you're number one or monopoly or not, you need to continuously keep improving based on the needs of that market. Because even if you're a monopoly, someone else, if you're not innovating and if you're not improving, someone else will come and sort of take the number one slot from you. So I don't think as a PM there is much difference whether you're operating on a product which is a monopoly versus you are in a competitive market. The only thing which I can think of is, in a competitive market, you need to be way more agile as a PM, as a team, to respond to some of the things which your competitors are doing. So for example, if I am Uber and I am in, let's say Edinburgh, right? And let's say I'm number two, there's some other competitor. Suddenly on a day, they sort of drop their prices, or they launch a promotion where you get a coupon code and you get 50% off your pricing. Then as a PM, looking at the needs of those market, I need to be way more agile to deliver some of those features if they don't exist. Because in that scenario, you don't have much time to respond. Yeah.
How do you manage decommissioning features for which serve less of a usage to your customers?
So, interesting question. So I think it goes back to the point where you need to figure out how important is that feature for your customer. Is it something basic which might be used by just 100 customers, but if you remove that, those 100 customers will go off. And it might not have a big impact on your business numbers, but it might have a big impact on your reputation. So there are a couple of ways of doing that if you have to decommission. First thing is you need to figure out what is your cost of maintaining that feature versus what can be the potential impact if you remove that feature, and how much impact that will have on customers. Let's say if my cost of maintaining that feature is, let's say, 1 engineer per year, I might be willing to take that cost. But let's say if the cost is 10 engineers per year, and my impact from that feature and usage of that feature is not huge, then I need to go and proactively start communicating with customers that this feature is going to be decommissioned at some time in future or at this date. So I guess that's the channel which you need to take, which a lot of companies do, where you give a lot of advance notice to your customers who are using that feature. Yeah.
So say you want to test a new feature, but within a production app, how do you set expectations with consumers outside of putting beta to the next to the feature to say, well, this is a test feature we're looking to implement, and this shouldn't impact the brand as such, as it's a test feature?
Yeah. So there are a couple of ways of doing that. A lot of companies do private beta, which is basically a beta. So for example, let's say you're launching a feature, you're in a big global company. The first thing you'll do is you'll do an internal beta, which is a beta within the company employees. If your product is end consumer product, right? For example, if I have to launch a feature on Prime Video, a lot of employees of Amazon are customers of Prime Video, so I can do a beta internally. Second thing you do is you do a private beta where if it is a very customer-centric, CX-centric feature, you sort of get a group of people through an agency or directly in a room and sort of do a beta. The third thing is you do a public beta, but in a controlled manner, wherein you say you will release this feature only to, let's say, 1% of your customers, right? And a lot of companies do that, where they release that feature to 1% of customers, see the impact, see if they need to tweak anything or change anything, and then increase that to 5%, increase that to 10%, and then do a worldwide rollout. So in that manner, you sort of control in case there is negative impact on the customer.
So what happens if that 1% is like 100,000 users?
You can reduce that to 0.1%, right? So it's just a percentage. You need to figure out how much customers you need to get an understanding of, to get enough data which can inform your decisions. Sometimes it might be just 10 customers, sometimes it might be 1,000 customers.
What criteria would you use to determine this 1% or 0.1%?
Again, it depends on what is the feature, what is the product. As I said, as a PM, you need to figure out. So there are some things, right? First point is that you need to figure out that this doesn't break anything or this doesn't cause a negative impact. For example, let's say I'm releasing a feature on payments, right? As a PM, I need to be absolute sure that whatever additional advancement I'm doing with this feature that might work or might not work, but it should not have a negative impact. It shouldn't be like that a customer is supposed to be charged for £5, I go and charge him for £10, right? That's a big negative impact. So first thing is the whole point of doing this incremental rollout is you probably test that negative scenarios with 5 customers, 10 customers, and then you sort of, once you are sure that there are no negative impact, you roll out to an incremental percentage of customers. And there's no hard definition that you should do 1%, 5%, or 10%, but as a PM and based on that feature, you need to take that call.
As we involve the customer segment to determine users that take part in the testing.
Right.
But probably there's no rule for it.
There's no rule for it, but what you need to figure out is what that feature is, which segment of customers that feature is most relevant for. I'll give you an example. Uber, I think, again, starting with emerging markets, launched a feature around women's safety, where you can press a button and it will call 911 or a number of police or some Uber number. Now, for testing that feature, and if your audience is going to be women, you need to understand when to surface that feature when you're testing it. You probably will want to surface it during the night times to women, you have the full profile of the customers. And only if you get data from those customers, you will be able to figure out whether it's useful or not, right? Because if you're surfacing that feature at mid of the day to male customers, you anyways know that such incidents are going to be very rare. So the usage of feature will be rare. So you need to keep in mind what the feature is, what is the intended customer segment, and select your testing group based on that. Yeah.
If you're looking to roll out a global feature, how do you sort of go about the rollout? Is it something you do where you focus on like a specific market and test it first, or is it sort of going out there globally in small increments?
Depends again from country to country. For example, when Netflix launched, and even when Prime Video launched in 2017, we did a global expansion to around 170 odd countries in a single shot. Same thing Netflix did in 2016. So different companies and different products might follow different strategy. And again, that depends on how big that feature is and how much marketing and PR coverage you want. If you want to take advantage of that coverage, it's best to do a global launch because it will be covered across different countries, across different media channels, etc. So the awareness of the feature will be more. Whereas if you are not sure about the feature, you might, and if you are not sure whether this will work or not work, whether the feature is in perfectly fine state or is there a probability that it might be broken, then you might want to restrict that launch and do it at a country level or at probably a city within that country.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Because we are touching testing. Would you say that the approach to A/B testing is different in this context of a global market, or is it the same? Or would you say that you are facing the same challenges?
So, in general, the approach is, and the way you will collect the data is pretty much same, but the purpose of A/B testing and this testing is different. The purpose of A/B testing is to figure out if I surface this feature to two customers who are same, who have the same behavior, how will they respond, right? So two segments of customers, I surface this feature, how will they respond? That's considering that you are launching in the same country, same territory, same external factors, etc. Whereas the purpose of this international expansion testing is more around, it has nothing to do with, you definitely know that the people in Japan are going to respond differently from people in UK, right? So there's no point in comparing that data. But the purpose of this testing is more to see that when you launch in Japan, since you are launching in a new country, do you want to contain your launch to make sure that it doesn't break, the product is capable of taking the load in case you start seeing a lot of customers coming in. You want to probably give some time to see, are there any legal issues or does it hurt the cultural sentiment of people in that country, etc. Right? So if you are doing a contained launch, it's much easier to control those things in case anything goes wrong. Yeah.
Do you use or follow certain project management methodology, such as Agile, or if you do, how closely you follow that, or just...
Yeah. In my experience, based on different companies I've worked with, I have never strictly followed a certain type of methodology. Most of the company these days follow Agile, but they sort of customize Agile to their needs, right? Either at a company level or even in many companies at a team level. So you will see one team operating very differently from a different team, from the second team. So it's more on the PM leaders and the engineering leaders to sort of see what suits best for their team and work and use that methodology. For example, if you have all the team members in a specific location, let's say in UK, you might adopt a different methodology versus if you have team members split across time zones, split across continents, and you have to sync with them every day. So it all depends on the environment of your team. But most of the global companies are pretty flexible in terms of letting that decision making be on the teams on how they want to operate.